everyone, and welcome to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we have an amazing guest on our show today. We're going to be talking about two different issues. We're going to be talking about communication within relationships and how to talk about abuse with a partner when you've experienced abuse in the past. We're also going to be talking about some of the devastating shootings that have been going on in our country that have been targeting Black and Brown people. And so we're going to be discussing two sensitive topics, so trigger warning on the front end of the show, but I know that you are going to really learn a lot from this. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest today, Alexis Douglas. Hello, Alexis.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know this is a heavy time in the world, and so we so appreciate you spending your time and energy with us today. And you have so much wisdom and so many things that I'd like to just start by reading your bio because, wow, this is amazing. I'll let you talk about it. About your life and work and all that in a minute, but first let me just read through this because there's so many things here. So Alexis Douglas specializes in empowering couples and individuals to become their embodied authentic selves. I love that so much. She is an educator, transformation catalyst, couples communication coach, and conversation facilitator. She empowers personal transformation through teaching, compassionate listening skills, and authentic emotional expression. She has a personal life mission to restore love to those who have been oppressed. Oh, you're going to fit right in on the show. As an expression of that mission, she has spent 3 years as an adult literacy instructor and authored motivational messages that were added to the curriculum. Since 2017, she has co-facilitated monthly 18-hour workshops with the Alternatives to Violence Project for incarcerated citizens. These workshops include teaching active listening, self-reflection and awareness, communication, cooperation, and affirmation skills. She was nominated and selected as 2020 Peace Fellow for her work with Alternatives to Violence Project. Oh my gosh, you are doing so much good in the world. Thank you for being on the show. Wow.
Well, thank you. It's always so interesting when you hear somebody else talk about you.
Yes. Oh, this such amazing stuff. And I see the overlaps in your work, but also you're doing different things, but they all kind of have this core message of communication and uplifting the oppressed. And I just read the bio, but we want to hear from you. How did you get here? How did this become your life's mission? And tell us more about your work.
So in 2016, I had a very transformative spiritual awakening while sitting in my living room. We won't go into the full details of that story, but it was a life-changing moment. And I got in tune with my intuition through heavy meditation and then just recognizing through experience how much our thoughts help reflect and shape the reality that we experience.
Yes.
So I call my intuition my moonbeam. And
Nice.
when I had this, my brother actually named it, but when I had this awakening experience, I would get what I refer to as downloads, and I would just follow them very obediently. The adult literacy, I don't do that anymore, but I did it for 3 years. And recognizing the power of people's thoughts and seeing my own limiting beliefs is where the motivational messages came from. And so every download I would get, I would just tell it right to my students and give them a speech, and then we would begin to do math. And I've called myself a positivity bully. When I was that goofy math teacher that made you celebrate every close to win, that made, because adults show up with so many, especially in adult literacy. So that means you likely don't have a high school diploma. You're
Mhm.
already living in abject poverty,
Right.
and people show up with different cognitive issues or
Right.
different ways that they learn, and
Right.
so they may have been told they were stupid their whole lives or that
Right.
they just can't learn, and
Yeah.
all these different things, have just been passed along in school because they were well behaved, lots of
Right.
stuff. So I just had to brainwash people into believing in themselves enough
Yeah.
to observe their process to learn. Um,
Yes. Oh, that's so amazing. Yeah, we talk about intuition here, and I actually do like an intuition class and stuff. And you're so right. When you get those downloads, when you get those whispers from your intuition, it's always based in love and expansion. So it's going to be like brainwashing yourself with love and not letting other people brainwash you, but just listening to that guidance inside. Yeah, that's so great. So continue.
and I found those downloads are easier done than said.
Mm,
Like, for
mm.
me, you're supposed to do it right when you get it, because if you wait
Yeah,
too long, you talk yourself out of it.
right.
Um,
Yes.
but it was a download for me to start my alternatives to violence work,
Mm,
and that work was so restorative to me in many
yeah,
ways. I had
yeah.
issues with men, I had issues with my father,
Right.
and it took for me to go through the program myself, become a
Mm,
facilitator, and then begin the monthly workshops
hmm.
in a men's prison to see
Wow.
and be able to recognize that men have feelings
Right, right.
and they have trauma and issues that led them there and adverse react. So, like, all the reasons I had such internalized contempt
Mm,
that I would give women and my male friends passes for, the
mm,
men who would show up in my romantic life, and not that I picked romantic relationships from prison, but
right.
I got to see men
Yeah,
affected. I got to, and
yeah.
then I was there to do a task, like, not a
Mm,
task, but I was there to
to teach.
embody love and compassion.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
So it was so restorative for me
Mm,
with that work. Um, and then there were just a lot of discoveries I had about myself. And
mhm.
now I'm a coach and I help people like that, learning those skills through
Sure.
facilitating the workshops,
Yeah.
learning that I saw boyfriends as something different than friends.
Mm,
So they didn't, and it was a lesser category, and boyfriends
mm,
were more of a utility than a,
mm.
and so like the communication would come from that perspective,
Right,
the right or wrong, the zero sum, the
right.
either you're doing what you're supposed to do or you're not.
Mm,
That is what began my work in becoming a
wow.
couples communications coach.
Right. So you experience healing for yourself in these areas, and then you're helping to translate that through these downloads to other people through your coaching. That's such beautiful work, and I love what you're doing with incarcerated people because you're right. There's so many stigmas about people who are incarcerated, and there's usually trauma behind why they are in prison, also just unjust systems sometimes, but a lot of times there's deep trauma, and those are the things that need to be uncovered and worked through, and so that's really really beautiful and important
And
work.
I just want to mention that there's also a both and aspect to that.
Mm, mm,
So I am also an anti-racism educator and I have an upcoming workshop.
yeah.
But there's a both and in the societal oppression, creating
Mm,
conditions for poverty, which is
yeah.
its own trauma, but then alcohol, drug abuse and addiction and
Sure.
things like that, which
Yeah.
traumatize individuals, are
Mm-hmm.
higher. And so if you come from an impoverished community, you're
Right.
more likely to have traumas and then be funneled into a life of crime. So
Right.
there's the like people who are in there wrongfully convicted, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also people who are a product of a system of oppression without even
Mm,
knowing it.
right. Right. When you're not given any good options, you can't make any good there's not a good choice to take when you aren't offered any other paths. And
Or if I'm depressed all the time,
yeah.
drugs do help me feel better, and
Right, right,
that's what I can do, right? Like, there
right,
is it is
right.
stressful being broke. Anybody who's been broke understands.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, that makes so much sense. And one of the things when I was reading through your bio and looking at your work, like you really focus on helping people be their authentic self. And so I think this has something to do with trauma and those types of things. But I would love for you to first tell us, like, what does it mean to be your authentic self, and why is it so hard for people who've experienced abuse and trauma to really stand in their authenticity?
So those two questions go hand in hand, in
Mm,
that if I am conditioned, you would like people who are in trauma, they're usually
mm,
conditioned for some benefit to others,
right.
some aspect of like, I am only valuable for what I can do,
Yeah.
for being perfect and not irritating you,
Mm,
as a tool of sexual abuse. Like I'm an object and it is my job to perform for safety.
mm, right.
And
Right.
safety looks different. I don't just mean physical safety, but it could
Right.
be like, mental peace, like, or a sense of
Right.
belonging.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so the hard part of so being authentic though is being
Hmm.
able to be who you are without the reflection of another to tell you who you are.
Right. Right. Yeah.
What I've discovered with my clients is that people don't really know how, if I'm only know how to do, like I'm only valuable for what I do,
Right.
then I don't know how I feel. I know how to
Mm.
respond to how others feel.
So you're living in reaction versus
Yes,
like from a true, like, this is how I feel as a
from
person
intention.
individually. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
making a conscious decision. I'm only
Hmm.
choosing how I react to other people, but I'm not choosing
Right.
what I want to create for my own life. I'm not choosing my goals from my desires. I'm choosing from my available options. I'm not
Right.
choosing my partners for what would be beneficial to me. I'm
Mm.
choosing my partners for how I can find my value to them.
Right. Right. Ooh,
So
good.
when you're your authentic self, you have that's a journey of self-love, but also self-awareness,
Hmm.
recognizing what feelings feel like in your body,
Right. Right.
recognizing how you want to treat other people
Yeah.
without it being tied to a transactional exchange.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and then just recognizing that you are valuable just
Mm.
because you
Mm.
exist,
Right.
and the love that you give to other people with your doing, you can do for yourself because you
Right.
deserve that.
Right.
And it's okay for other people to do it for you too. You don't have to earn love. You
Hmm.
don't make other people, well, there are times where we don't make other people earn our love. There are people who
Right.
do, and there are people who
Right.
don't. But
Right.
it
That makes
is,
sense.
for me, authenticity is learning who you are while simultaneously choosing who you want to be.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. So you're like in the now, but you're also projecting into the future, like understanding like this is what's happening in my body, this is who I am in a moment, but also realizing that you don't necessarily want to stay there. Like you can grow and expand into better um, and versions of yourself that you enjoy more. And it's not about you necessarily being bad now, but just you have that opportunity to move forward. I like that
But
perspective.
I teach my clients to be in their past, present, and future in the now.
Okay, okay, talk to me about that.
So bringing the awareness, your conscious awareness to, it's
Mm-hmm.
all, I keep looking down because I'm visualizing my
Yeah.
past, my present, and my future.
Uh-huh.
Every situation is comprised of, every decision you make is comprised of those
Mm,
elements.
mm,
How the decision you're making is going to, it's affected by your past
right.
because that's where you learned how to make these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing happening now that's telling you you have to make a decision.
Right.
And then there's a future you're going to experience from that decision.
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
So the work in knowing who you are initially is learning
Mm,
how your past affects the present moment, the decisions that you're already making.
right.
But then once you learn that in your now, you got
Mm,
to be able to recognize when it's something from your past, and and
mm-hmm.
and when it's something just in your present and you're afraid of what was in your past.
Mm,
And then once you have that awareness and you get grounded in that, now you can
right.
be in clarity for what you will decide for your future.
Right.
Because event plus reaction equals outcome.
Mm.
You still now, instead of just reacting, we have to choose
Right.
how we want to react for the future we
Right.
want to experience.
Right, right. And what are some ways we can foster that awareness? Because I think so many times people are only thinking of the past or they're only dreaming of the future, and they don't realize that if they want to create the new future, they have to take some action in the now moment. Like, how can we create awareness around that? What tools do you give your clients around there?
So initially, so I believe that feelings are guides,
Mm,
and we do body awareness and feeling awareness. With some
yeah.
people, I use astrology. With my women clients, I use astrology
Okay.
because of where the moon is in their
Mm-hmm.
charts. And we
And that
women
does
run in
affect your
cycles with the
menstrual
moon.
cycle, ladies.
It does. This Mars retrograde has got mine doing all kinds of wonky stuff. But it is being aware of what feelings feel like in your body and then
Mm-hmm.
tweaking some of that language.
Yeah.
So a common tweak that has to happen is I'm suffering from anxiety right now.
Mm,
Are you feeling anxious, or are you frustrated? Or are you
mm,
nervous? Or are you feeling pensive?
mm,
And the reason we go through those feelings is because pensive, frustrated, or nervous are much more manageable than I am riddled with anxiety.
mm,
Anxiety is like this condition that happens to us.
mm.
And this isn't true. There are some people who have who suffer from
Right,
anxiety, and for
right,
them, I would suggest therapy.
right.
But as far as coaching goes,
Mm-hmm.
then feelings exist in a polarized kind of perspective, right? So like anxiety, nervousness, and excitement feel the same in the body.
Mm,
It's the thoughts we assign to it.
gotcha.
So in my sessions, we work through identifying that. We find a place in the past where that feeling existed. We reframe
Mm-hmm.
the past.
Gotcha.
That is a tool that you use to bring awareness, because
Mm,
if the reframing reduces the triggers. And then I teach my clients conscious memory stacking is what I call it.
okay. Okay. Tell us about that.
Okay. So in that past, present, future perspective,
Mm-hmm.
what I've observed over time is I have triggers from my past.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in this now moment, my ability to reduce my trigger from the past is like
Yeah.
a muscle that I have to exercise.
Right.
So, first of all, there's no like instant fix where, like, oh,
Right.
I have this awareness and then I never have this trigger again. That's
Yeah.
not how it works. But the more in this now moment,
Mm-hmm.
I reframe what's happening. Then,
Mm.
when I'm in the future and I'm having another trigger,
Yeah.
it is from this reframed moment as
Mm.
opposed to the future, the
Gotcha.
past before it.
Okay.
And so what happens then is you're bringing your consciousness
Mm-hmm.
to the now moment and programming it for your future.
Right. Right. And
So
so
that when you encounter, okay,
that sounds a lot like conversations about neuroplasticity and like the um, parts that fire together, wire together, like
yes,
all those types of things. So it's kind of like this groove and path in the brain is really comfortable for us because we've had this trauma reaction over and over. But when we can reframe it and even take the path ever so slightly over from that, then the next time we have that trigger, like it's a little bit further away from that
yes, and
rut that we've gotten into.
it's less intense and more
Right.
manageable. And then
Right.
over time, or
Mm-hmm.
long, depend, some people months, years, depending
Mm-hmm.
on what. Also, a lot of people are running from a life they don't live. My clients tend
Mm.
to be high achievers but grew up in
Right.
hypercritical households.
Sure.
And so over time, it really is like, just you don't have those same somatic responses
Mm.
because you've done the work to.
Right.
For example, I'll give a personal example. I have
Okay.
sometimes abandonment issues,
Yeah.
but there was a moment recently where there was a dramatic change in my volunteer group,
Mm.
and I found out on the call, and that it just sent me into a trigger response. I'm
Right.
crying, I'm chaos, I'm catastrophizing, all the
Mm-hmm.
things, right? And in that moment, another member of the group stopped and held space for me and gave me
Mm.
comfort.
Mm.
And so that became a moment I was supported instead of a moment I was
Mm.
abandoned.
Right. Right. So you're creating
because
new memories. Wow.
yes. So then in the future, when I'm having another trigger response to abandonment, if, let me not just claim them, if I have another,
Yeah.
I have support to look back from or
Right.
look back to, like, oh, and then there's the mental equivalent too of being able to recognize what support looks like
Mm. Wow.
through
Wow.
that reframing.
Wow. That's really beautiful. I love that you have so many tools like that that you share with your clients. And I'd love to maybe, if you're comfortable, shift the conversation just a little bit because we've been talking about trauma and just society and how it can really lock people into a life path where there's not a lot of choices and options, and then injustices in the world and all those things. I'd really like to bring up the topic of Jacob Blake. And just for everybody listening, like, Alexis and I had a conversation about this before, so I'm not just throwing this on her raw. We've had a conversation. She's consented to wanting to talk about this. Um, but this is a terrible reoccurrence in trauma we are seeing happen over and over in society. Jacob Blake's story is not the only one we've seen this year. It This happens over and over again. And from your perspective, what do we need to know about this? And can you talk us through from what you're seeing from like a trauma perspective and processing this situation?
So, um, what the I can right now I can talk you through my trauma response, and then
Mm,
also I've had some conversations with I have a client who is in a biracial relationship.
yeah.
So couples who have different grieving methods go through stress and strain.
Right.
Situations like this, systemic oppression, the murder of Black
Mm,
lives consistently by
right.
government sanctioned people, is enraging
Yeah.
while not being surprising
Right.
at the same time.
Exactly.
So I have rage inside me right now
Yeah.
that makes me shorter in my conversation. It makes me
Mm,
less patient to be able to deal with simple noises of life.
sure.
It I have to disengage and re-engage in like
Mm,
this ebb and flow process because I'm an
right.
anti-racism educator. I have what
Right.
I feel is a mission on my life. So I don't get to just bury my head and stay or escape
Sure.
to another planet no matter how much I
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
But that irritability, I guess, is what I want to
Mm,
talk about and address. So if in biracial couples, often there are things, because we live in a racialized society, there are
mhm,
things that come up that create
sure.
contention. And if um because so I'm speaking specifically of white and Black biracial, although
Hmm.
this happens in other, with like if there's a white person and
Mm,
another minority, there are other
sure.
types of issues that come up. So
Right.
I don't want to erase the effects that happen to
Sure.
other minorities, but I'm
Sure.
that's Black and white are what I'm talking about.
Right.
Sometimes if I want to feel like you get me, you see me, you hear me,
Mm,
and you just can't, I
right.
may not be able to feel your support no matter how loving you are. Not
Right.
to mention, if you're white and you haven't done some allyship work, you haven't done some
Mm,
anti-racism education, you just are
sure.
loving from your heart, with
Sure.
harmful things can be said.
Right. Right.
Like, nobody that is going through the trauma of watching someone be shot 7 times in front of their children wants to hear, well, what did he do?
Right.
That is victim blaming.
Right.
Nobody, like, nobody that is of color, like Tucker Carlson says, no
Mm,
wonder vigilant. And the thing is, these things are so predictable. I
sure.
can predict that the media will begin to dig into the victim's past. I can
Right.
predict that the murder will begin to be justified and people
Yeah.
will, and then I see people
Mm,
having no regard for or compassion for life.
yeah.
And it is difficult inside the relationship to not
Right.
look at my partner who is white and be like, would you call the police on me?
Right. Right.
And I'm not talking about like cases of domestic violence where
Sure. Sure.
somebody beating on you, call the police.
Right.
But here's the thing, that does have different implications in an interracial relationship
Sure.
because you may be calling for your partner to be murdered. That
Mm,
is
mm.
a real risk.
Savior. Yeah.
Yes. Um, Other things that come up in these types of situations is that white people been through trauma too,
Mm,
right? Like when you have the privilege, when you have white privilege, you also have responsibility for being more emotionally regulated and more present in
mm,
a disagreement because no matter what,
mm.
you have racial implications to the like what happens.
Sure.
It those things just do play out.
Yeah.
And so navigating those conversations, coming
Mm,
realizing that impact and intention are different
sure.
while tensions are high is just difficult.
Right. Right.
It's not impossible, and
Sure.
love will trump. Oh,
Yeah.
I hate that word. Love will traverse all, it'll carry you through.
Yes. Yes.
But
Mm,
when this happens all the time,
mm,
recognize that your partner might be shorter with you. Like
right.
give a lot more grace.
Mm, mm. And does that extend to non-partnered relationships like friends? Um, kind of communicating. And I think a lot of times white people care, but often, like you said, they're looking at their own trauma. They're not saying and doing the right things. And so like that understanding of the trauma that's going on, even if you want to understand, you don't necessarily get it. And so does that transfer to not just romantic relationships?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It absolutely like for example, I have a friend who is white and she says that whenever I need to, I can call and just yell and scream.
Mm,
But that's somebody I love who
right.
has not hurt me and I
Right.
don't want to do that.
Right.
But then too, sometimes I just don't want white comfort.
Right. Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
just because I may not have done enough unpacking to be
Sure.
able to not become prejudiced in that moment or not
Sure.
say some things that I don't want to be accountable for.
Right. Right.
And with because of that dynamic of the
Mm,
dominant and non-dominant culture,
right.
those things have real implications. They have real,
Mm,
like if I slip up and mess up too bad, I'm still
mm,
I don't know how to take off my
sure.
skin for you.
Sure. Yeah.
And you may have the best of intentions. What I need you to
Sure.
be doing is convincing your family members. I need you to
Right.
be convincing them to vote for equitable policies,
Right.
even if you're not talking to them about race. Like, don't
Yeah.
make, like, because I get it. You start talking about race, then people butt heads.
Mm,
But convince them of why these equitable policies are in their best interest.
right.
Convince, like, that's the word. I need you to be on the front lines with white people. Black
Mm,
people have been taking care of black people for as long, and you can, and that shows me that you're down for the call. Because I
yeah.
don't just see what you're doing in front of me. Trust me, I'm
Sure.
watching what you're doing with your life,
Right.
where your values lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do that work,
Yeah.
and then tell me you love me.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And that kind of leads into my next question, and that's like, how can we apply healthy communication skills in times like these? How can we receive that maybe somebody doesn't want white comfort in the moment? Like, how can we communicate in a way that we are being supportive and not talking over, but are truly listening?
So reflective listening is a skill that can be practiced.
Mm, mm,
Getting to common ground with someone
yeah.
is where real communication starts.
Yeah.
So if I'm telling you I'm hurt,
Yeah.
this is bothering me, I'm enraged, and this is what's going on.
Right.
Don't tell me how you feel the same. Don't tell me
Mm,
like here tell me you understood what I'm saying.
Right.
reflect it back to me. So what I hear you saying is
Mm,
this, and that gets a little weird when it's just that canned practice. So
right.
you could even own that, okay, this is a tense situation. I
Mhm.
won't have the right words, but I want to
Mm,
make sure that we're starting on common ground. What
right.
I heard you say is,
Yeah.
and then the other person will begin to correct. But if you don't get to that common ground, you may
Mm,
just have conversations where one person says a statement, the other person says a statement, the other
right.
person, and nobody's asking questions, and there's no
Right.
loving curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, loving curiosity. That's a really great term. I like that you use that. Can you expound a little bit more on that term?
So, loving curiosity is not about justifications or right or wrong or trying to make this situation make sense.
Mm,
It doesn't make sense.
right.
It is crazy making the society that we live in.
Yeah.
So loving curiosity is more about understanding the other person's experience
Right.
rather than trying to see if it's right or wrong in the world.
Mm, mm. Kind of see through
Whether
the
it's
eyes.
valid,
Yeah.
if that whether you find it to be valid or not, that's what
Right.
that person's experience is in the moment. And if that
Right.
is someone you love and care about,
Yeah.
that's the place you need to be coming from, is that I love and care about you, and
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in this moment is real for
Yes.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So I think that your work is so valuable because it is um, anti-racist in nature, but you're bringing these profound relationship skills into it. And when I'm hearing you talk about this, I think it parallels so well with people who've experienced abuse and people who haven't. And really, racism is a form
Abuse.
of abuse. Um, but I can see it in the frame of whether somebody's experienced sexual abuse in their childhood or in another relationship, or they've experienced domestic violence, and then they get into a relationship with somebody who is not trying to hurt them, but then they have to somehow communicate that they've experienced all this trauma. And sometimes that other person doesn't understand what that's like. And I think insensitive statements can be made like, yeah, I get that, but that was a long time ago. Or, why is that still bothering you? Can you talk a little bit about how you coach couples who are, um, in a place where one spouse has experienced abuse, and then trying to facilitate a healthy conversation so they can feel comfortable sharing that? Because going back to authenticity, you're only going to create vulnerability and safety in a relationship when you can get to a point where you're able to share some things. But how do you coach your clients through one person having a past history with a lot of trauma, the other one maybe not, and try to navigate those waters?
So, ideally, the person who has had a lot of trauma would have worked with a therapist
Yes.
and been began to understand how that trauma plays out in them, their body, their lived
Yes.
experiences,
Yes.
and they would have some tools for how to self-regulate when they're having a trauma response.
Right.
Now, discussing a person's trauma and coaching a person to operate from their intention and
Mm,
not a justification is more what I do.
right.
So, for example, I have a couple who one partner had an emotionally abusive mother
Mm,
and an absent father.
yeah.
And so what happens is this person, they would lash out
Mm,
um a lot of times when they weren't feeling emotionally supported and
right.
kind of be verbally attacking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
initially we got to get them to recognizing what's going on with them
Yeah.
and how to communicate and advocate for what their desire is, because that there's a desire behind that lash out.
Right.
And but then once we get that person grounded and
Mm,
stabilized in being able to express what their desire is,
right.
it really is reminding the couple that they love each other
Mm,
and their goal is to have a more cohesive relationship.
Right.
And so I start my sessions, I start I create the container for the couples coaching
Yeah.
with the idea that there is a relationship
Mm-hmm.
and two stewards of the relationship.
Mm.
And so what it takes to be a good steward of the relationship is very different than being right and wrong.
Right. Right.
So it's
Hmm.
two people that want to have a relationship and they are a team for
Yeah.
how to take care of this relationship.
Hmm. Yeah.
Through that, from that lens and that operating perspective, the conversation is teach. So I feel statements,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then how does that and teaching the person who hasn't been in trauma
Yeah.
or who doesn't know how to manage those responses,
Right.
getting them to understand that it's not about them.
Mm. Yeah.
So they should not defend. What's required here is love and safety and protection,
Mm. Right.
creating a safe space. If it's not about you,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't be threatened in this experience.
Right. Right. And I think that's really good. Just I see in my relationship with my husband, thankfully, I've had the opportunity and privilege to have some therapy. But particularly in the beginning, there would be things that would trigger me a lot and would make me cry or would make me just go into panic. And I think it would have been very easy in the beginning of our relationship for my husband to take that personally, like he can never do anything right, or that this is directed at him causing some fault. But thankfully, we were able to talk about, like, after I got out of the trauma, I would try to come back, after the trigger had passed a bit, and just be like, you know what? That wasn't about you. That was actually something that happened in my childhood that it reminded me of this. And I really am sorry that I, projected it this way. I'm going to work on it, but also just want you to know, like, this was from something back here and not you. And he was really open to receiving that. And I think that's why our relationship has worked really well. But I think a lot of times people um, aren't able to recognize, or their partner isn't able to say in the moment that this isn't about you. And so that confusion comes up. Yeah.
And sometimes, so like if you've done the work and you've gone to therapy,
Mm,
you also have to recognize that every partner you may select because of your history with trauma may not be
mm,
the person who can support you. And
mm,
that's just a part of the journey of healing through that.
mm.
So, showing if you've done the work to be able to identify that you have it
Right.
as soon as you can, because no,
Mm,
when you're in your full blown trigger, it's just
right.
that's like asking a drunk
Right.
person to make a sober decision.
Right.
But as soon as you can, doing the work of owning that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then too, you have the right to advocate for yourself
Mm,
with your partner and say, I am a person who has some form of PTSD, complex or just regular old PTSD,
yeah.
and what is required for loving connection with me is these things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they have to be perfect at providing those things all the
Sure.
time, but you're creating a container
Right.
that teaches the person how to love you. If I
Right.
show up with abandonment issues,
Yeah.
someone who is gone all the time for work is not likely going to be the ideal partner for me.
Right. Right.
And I should love myself enough to make sure that that's just not someone I'm going to choose to
Right.
pursue a
Right.
relationship with,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Totally.
recognize that for the aforementioned abandonment, like that
Yeah.
someone who has to travel for work a lot
Mm-hmm.
cannot provide what is necessary for me to feel safe and a sense of belonging.
Right. Right. So you have to know your needs, and then have expectations and state your needs, but also know that, not every person can or wants to fulfill those needs. And you need to find somebody who can and is willing to do those things for a good
And
relationship. That makes sense.
that's where the authenticity comes in, though, the
Mm,
choosing from your desires.
right.
So people who have been through trauma have the hardest time interviewing or having this interviewing
Mm,
mindset about who
yeah.
their partner should be.
Right.
Like
Right.
It's all focused on what do I have to do to get a
Yeah.
partner, or what do
Yeah.
I have to do to be in a healthy relationship or
Sure.
to have a healthy relationship, but not what do I desire from my partner?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
who's my ideal partner avatar?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like it matters to know what ways you want to be loved and then choose someone who loves in that way.
Right. Right. That makes sense. So let's make a hypothetical here. Let's say somebody is in the beginning of a romantic relationship. They're starting to date, things are getting serious, and they've talked to this partner about a lot of things in their life, but they haven't talked about past abuse yet. And they realize before we get any more serious, so this person can understand me, I need to share about this part of my life. Um, what are some tips you would give to that person to set up the conversation for success and to do it in a way that is honoring their self and their sensitivity in the moment, but also, I always think it's sad when parents, take their kids out past their bedtime to a restaurant that's like fine dining and expect the child to be quiet. Like, you're not setting them up for success because it's
No.
past their bedtime and they're tired. Um, how can you set up a conversation like that for success? And of course, there's some people who won't receive a conversation like that, and that's impossible. But with somebody who is generally compassionate and caring, how could you frame that to go into the best possible plan?
I'm glad that you said that last part, with someone who's generally compassionate, caring and compassionate. Um, because that was going to be my first step. Like, so
Mm,
are you evaluating the person's character in this early dating process, right? Like,
right,
are
right.
they a kind person? If you've been through trauma, kindness should be very, and not nice, kindness should be very
Mm,
high on your dating requirements.
right.
Um, but so I think that it is safer to maybe breadcrumb the conversation
Yeah,
out.
yeah. That makes
So,
sense.
like, you can reference that you've been through some things through the, getting to know people stage
Mm-hmm.
of the relationship,
Yeah,
that you don't necessarily want to start out teaching someone how to love you. You have your
right.
standards and requirements, because initially when you're dating, you're
Mm-hmm.
evaluating if this is a partner you would like to have, not if you would like to be their partner.
Right, right.
So if there's someone that you like and you guys are on the same page and you're moving forward,
Yeah.
then the conversation is going to be maybe started out by, so how I told you I went through some stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed this came up during this scenario.
Right, right.
And seeing how those smaller conversations go,
Mm-hmm.
and that's more about managing your own, like, re-traumatizing
Right,
experience,
right.
because if that person bails, you
Right.
kind of want them to bail
The
earlier
smaller
on.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, on the smaller thing, than like, oh my gosh, I've poured out my heart to you
Right.
and I've told you everything I've ever been through, and I still want you to see me as whole, and I also want you to save me at the same time, and
Right.
then they just dip,
Right.
like. So I think it's, yes, there can be a scheduled conversation. Like,
Sure.
I've done with my, so I typically see my couples
Mhm.
separately and together.
Right.
And so we may uncover something in a session that's an individual session, and then bring the contain, like, talk about it
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
in a
Mhm.
session.
Right.
But if you're dating early on, that's
Mhm.
your vulnerability that you're
Right.
choosing to give someone the responsibility of protecting.
Right. That makes sense.
So my suggestion is to be open, but
Mhm.
not, don't be an oversharer. Share
Right.
and get to know the person. See how they respond to this. See, and it's not,
Mhm.
I'm not trying to say, I don't mean like hide it,
Right, right.
but
Just
as
kind
it
of
comes
see it.
up,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Now, let's switch to like a different scenario. So this is what I've had with different people I've worked with, different survivors I've talked to. They have been so filled with shame, or they have had repressed memories of things that have happened in their childhood, and only after they're married has it come up, or they've found the courage to talk about it. Um, how would you what what similarities between that dating, kind of in the beginning conversation and when it's just like, whoa, I didn't realize this is gonna surface back up. What would you recommend in a situation like that where they've already kind of committed to the relationship, whether it's marriage or living together, whatever it is, and it's been a couple years?
If you can afford it, immediately seek outside help.
Yes.
If you were to find out that your kidney were failing you, you
Right.
would go to the doctor, and you
Yeah.
guys, as a partnership,
Yeah.
would figure out how to navigate that situation.
Yeah.
So if you've been together and emotional wounds are real wounds,
Mm,
then we have to fix this is good. So once again, this that example of two people who are stewards
right.
to the relationship.
Right.
It is your job to
Hmm.
do what is necessary for the relationship to survive. So if you can get outside help,
Yeah.
if you cannot afford outside help, begin to immerse yourself in things that give you guys language for your experience.
Mm,
YouTube, go on a YouTube spiral, buy
right.
books and do the work together,
Yeah.
because unpacking and then learning how to navigate those things is a
Hmm.
process,
Right.
and mistakes will be made along the way in that process. So as getting all the tools that you can
Mm.
at the onset would is going to help you be able to navigate that process.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So in both cases, it sounds like, getting outside support is really helpful in that.
Yes.
So there are steps you need to take in the relationship and some preparation and like seeding along the way. But also, it's important to have other people who can support you in that because your partner may not know how to respond. And just out of their shock, they may say something that they didn't intend to come across badly. And so you need somebody outside of them to also be a support. And yeah, this is so much wisdom here. And I want to come back with just a few more questions with you, but we're just going to take a quick break and then we'll finish up with our interview.
So there's choices that you have the opportunity to make. You can either stay with your abuser or you can leave. And make no mistake about it, it's going to be hard either way you go. But I can tell you one thing for sure. If you do decide to make that courageous decision to go, there's hope. So much hope.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we've been having a great interview with Alexis Douglas, and we've been talking all about relationships and how to talk to your partner about abuse you've experienced in the past. We've been talking about the trauma that has been happening over and over to Black and Brown people in our nation and around the world. And so we've really gotten into some deep and important subjects and really focused on communication, which is Alexa's specialty. She is so good at that. So Alexis, before I ask you some of our, final questions here, is there anything that you want to share that I didn't ask or that you wanted to follow up with?
The one thing that I want to follow up with is, when I'm saying get outside help, I'm
Mm.
presuming that maybe the commercial helped me remember. I'm presuming you're in a loving, committed relationship where
Yeah,
you guys have the goal of wanting to stay together.
right.
But every relationship isn't going to be like that.
Mm.
And sometimes, if you've had repressed trauma and then you realize that that's coming up, you
Right.
will begin to see how that has colored your relationship choices.
Yeah,
So that work may start by you getting outside help and not involving your partner in it.
right.
Because if you don't already feel like supported,
Yeah.
loved, and held in a safe place by your partner,
Mm.
it may not be safe for you to unpack that with them. And
Mm.
you may have to work on having the courage to leave them
Right.
without that being another trauma that triggers some of the events. Because
Right.
if you've been through some stuff, self-worth is an issue, and
Yeah.
you may not be choosing partners that make you feel worthy. So beginning your own work might be that first step.
Mm, that is so powerful. So powerful. And one of the last questions that we ask every guest is just what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? Obviously, you have gone through so many trainings, you train people. Um, Out of all of that life experience, what's one of the best pieces of advice you've ever received?
So I am a child of trauma, and
Mm,
I remember very vividly when I was in college and my mother had just died.
mm,
I didn't recognize I was having a trauma response, but I was very heavily steeped in
sure.
caring about what other people thought of me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had my math teacher, Mr. Bohm, shout out to Mr. Bohm. He pulled me aside, and I had him for 3 classes. So I was able to begin, like, 3 semesters. I was able to
Okay.
begin trust with him, and I had a relationship. And he
Yeah.
said, Alexis, only care about what people you care about think.
Mm,
Don't give your mental energy to people who don't care about you, because there are
right.
7 billion people in the world,
Yeah.
and more of them don't care about you than do.
Right, right.
And he also, I'm sorry, this is just a Mr. Bone moment,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Tell us.
he taught me that working on my mind was actually like exercise, and that it
Mm,
wouldn't feel normal, or it wouldn't feel natural, and it would feel awkward in the beginning.
yeah.
But the more I did it, the better at it I would get. And
Uh,
so I do believe that if it were not for Mr. Bohm, oh no, I'm frozen. There we go.
you're back.
If it were not for Mr. Bohm, I may not be in the work that I'm doing, because that was a
Wow.
seed planted at a time where I was struggling to make it on my own,
Mm,
trying to do what I thought was right for my survival, and totally spazzing.
right, right. Wow.
I
Ah,
was ready to quit college.
wow. Wow. Well, thank God for teachers, right? I mean, some of them just come in at just the right times and really change our lives. Thank you for sharing that, and shout out to him. Um, and, I know that people really enjoyed this conversation, and you have such powerful work that you offer the world. Would you please tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can follow you, talk about your coaching, your website, your social media, all the things, because they're definitely going to want to follow you?
Well, thank you very much for that. On Facebook and Instagram, I am Ask Alexis. On Instagram, my handle is Ask Alexis 111. Um, my website is askalexis111.com. That was a download from my moonbeam, the
Nice.
111. Apparently it's special. It means manifestation, though, in numerology.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
and the work that I'm doing right now is I have an upcoming workshop. It starts September 11th. And it'll be for 10 weeks, where it's
Mm,
specifically a container for white women to
mm,
do the internal work of becoming an actively authentic ally. So
mm.
it's not just because authenticity is my thing. It
Yeah.
is, I focus more with my allyship efforts on becoming the kind of person that
Mm,
has what it takes to live allyship as a
yeah.
personal identity.
Yeah.
Because it's not just something you can read a couple books on and know about the history of white
Yeah.
supremacy
Yeah.
in the country. It is something you have to begin to embody. You have to
Right.
learn the compassionate listening skills,
Mm-hmm.
how to empathize for another's experience without making it about you. But
Right.
one of the things I'm very excited about, because I'm a spiritual intuitive,
Yeah.
is I have brought in a guest who will give us a practice for connecting with our ancestors and venerating them,
Mm,
because I am a firm believer that through the healing of our ancestors
mm,
and getting in touch with our ancestral ways, that's the way that we won't have another iteration of this fight in the future. We
mm.
have gotten better over time, but it is still also people getting murdered.
Yeah.
There's been so many this year already, and we've been on
Yeah.
quarantine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is, but until you connect inside and heal
Mm,
your ancestry, because I don't know. Okay, so you'll get a brief lesson on epigenetics also, which is a study
Yes,
of.
we love epigenetics here.
Oh, okay. That's all. That makes me so happy. So, due to, like, if you believe in epigenetics, then you understand that we've inherited this in our ancestors who live in our DNA, who gave our epigenome the instructions.
Right.
That has to be healed on both sides.
Yeah.
Right. We have to be able to become whole people. And
Right.
only through my own ancestral work have I been able to become the kind of person that can do it and become and then be doing my own allyship work.
Yeah.
So that's the upcoming course. You can sign up for that at www.askalexis111.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Ask Alexis, and I'm open to you private messaging me questions. Just know that while it will be anonymous and I will give you your personal response, I will use it for content because my goal is to have people, that's to Ask Alexis. Ask me the stuff. People been asking me my whole life. I'm the best when I'm answering questions.
Yes, yes. That's awesome. Beautiful. Oh, I love that invitation. And all my white ladies watching, check out her course because that sounds so valuable. I really appreciate you doing that hard work. I know that's a lot of emotional labor in addition to just running a course. And so we thank you for that. Thank you so much for your time being on this show.
I just want to mention one thing about signing up for my course. So you mentioned emotional labor. There's a reason that I'm willing to do it because built in my business model, 20% of the funds, 20% of the price of the course is what allows me to give my services to BIPOC, which is Black and Indigenous people of color, at rates that they can afford in my home city where the median income is $26,000 a year.
Wow.
So there's not only do you make yourself an ally and help make the world a better and safer, more inclusive place, I then use my time, because now I don't have to work as hard for it, to be able to help heal some of the effects and the ways that it shows up in people's relationship. So there is a twofold approach. I'm also open to, if you are doing your own allyship work, there is a donation button on my website for you to be able to contribute to sponsoring another person for this course. You don't have to commit the whole price, but if you got it, please do. Because if you're an ally, making more allies is a part of the journey too.
Yes. Wow. That is so beautiful. Yeah. And say the website one more time, if you would.
That is www.askalexis111.com. So that's,
thank you so much. Well, we really appreciate you here. Thank you. And please go ahead and follow Alexis on social media. Check out her website. And also come on over to the Courage 365 show social media accounts. Please follow us on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. We really need people to follow us on YouTube. I've told you this like every week for the last couple weeks. We need to raise those numbers so we can get 100 followers there, so we can get our custom URL, so we can spread the word to more people. Thank you for following the other social media pages, but that is the one that we need your help on, everyone listening. And also come to courage365.org, our website, and on there you can watch back episodes of the Courage 365 show. We've got a lot of great speakers that we've already focused on. And just for coming to our website, you can get a free ebook called 5 Keys to Living a Life of Courage. This is for survivors who are just taking those first steps on their journey. And also, if you are in a situation where you need help, where you are in a crisis situation, if it's imminent danger, call the police. But if you are looking for some supportive websites and organizations, some hotlines for you, go to the top of our menu bar where it says Need Help. Click there, and we've got all kinds of hotlines, all kinds of websites and organizations for you. And thank you all so much for listening to the show. This is such important information. And live this week with courage.